My name is Frank Miller. I'm 68 years old now, and the older I get, the more I realize there are some things people never truly leave behind. They just learn how to carry them long enough that it starts to feel normal. Most evenings after I close up the garage, I sit out back with a cup of coffee that usually goes cold before I even notice. There's an old radio sitting near the window that only works if you hit the side of it a couple of times first. Some nights it plays baseball through a layer of static. Other nights it's old country music and weather reports from towns far away. My life has looked about the same for years now. Open the garage in the morning, fix cars until late afternoon, sweep the floor before shutting the lights off, then sit outside and watch the sky go dark. I got used to the quiet a long time ago. People think loneliness arrives all at once like a car crash or a bad phone call, but it doesn't. It comes slowly, so slowly you barely notice it happening. One less phone call, one empty chair at dinner, one person who stops asking if you're coming, and eventually, nobody asks anymore. The worst part is that after a while you start believing maybe you deserve that. But my life wasn't always this quiet. There was a time when my son used to ask me every week if I was coming to watch him play baseball. His name was Ethan. When he was little, he loved baseball so much he carried his glove around like it was part of him. He left it on the kitchen table on the couch, and one night Claire had to go into his room and pry it out of his arms after he fell asleep holding it. One afternoon, he threw a ball straight through the garage window and stood outside looking so terrified I couldn't help laughing. Claire stood in the doorway with her arms crossed while Ethan kept trying to explain that he almost caught it. I still remember the sound of his laugh back then. Those are the memories that hurt the most when you get older. Not the big moments, the small ones you assumed you'd have forever. Every Friday before a game, Ethan would ask me, "You coming tonight, Dad?" And every time I told him yes. The hardest part is I meant it when I said it. That's the thing people don't understand about men like me. Most of us don't wake up in the morning planning to ruin our families. We just keep believing we'll fix things tomorrow. Then tomorrow turns into next week. Next week turns into a few more months. And one day you look up and realize years have passed while you were still saying, "I'll deal with it later." By the time Ethan started Little League, I was drinking more than I ever admitted out loud. At first, it was just a few beers after work, then whiskey at night to help me sleep. After a while, things just kept sliding little by little. I always told myself I was fine because I still showed up to work every morning. That's the lie a lot of functioning alcoholics use to keep themselves going. As long as you pay the bills, as long as you get up for work, as long as nobody finds you passed out somewhere, then things can't be that bad. But Claire saw it long before I did. Toward the end of our marriage, she barely argued with me anymore. And honestly, that was worse. When someone stops fighting with you, sometimes it means they're just too tired to keep hoping. I started seeing that look in her eyes more and more, a kind of sadness mixed with disappointment that only shows up after someone has forgiven the same person too many times, especially on Ethan's baseball nights. There's one game I still remember clearly. It was a cold Friday night early in the season. The metal bleachers still held onto the cold even after the sun went down. The heater in my old truck barely worked, and the windshield kept fogging up from my breathing. That night I stopped at Murphy's Bar after work for just one drink. I don't think any sentence damaged my life more than that one. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the game was almost over. Parents were folding up chairs near the fence. The loudspeaker crackled through bad wiring. Kids were laughing near the dugout while the coach packed equipment away, and Ethan was standing near the gate. He wasn't constantly staring toward the parking lot, just every few minutes, like he was trying not to disappoint himself too early. I still remember how that moment felt. My hand rested on the truck door handle, but I couldn't make myself open it. I could have gotten out. That's the part I've replayed in my head for almost 20 years. I could have walked onto that field, ruffled my son's hair, and apologized for being late. But I'd been drinking, not falling down drunk, just enough to feel ashamed of myself. And after a while, I got used to hiding from people whenever I hated myself most. The longer I stayed away, the harder it became to figure out how to come back. So I stayed in the truck. I watched Claire walk over to Ethan and say something to him. He nodded like it was fine, but kids always know more than adults think they do. He knew. The two of them left a few minutes later, and I stayed parked there long after everybody else had gone home, listening to the stadium lights buzzing in the dark. That should have been the moment I changed. But real life almost never works like movies do. Most things fall apart slowly, slow enough that you keep adapting to it while telling yourself it's only temporary. 3 years later, Claire filed for divorce. I didn't blame her. I honestly wouldn't have known how to ask her to stay anymore. The saddest part was that Ethan didn't become angry or rebellious the way kids do in movies. He just became polite, careful, like he'd learned that expecting less from me hurt less too. There's one afternoon after the divorce I still can't forgive myself for. Claire arranged for me to meet Ethan at a diner off Highway 8, and I actually showed up. I sat in my truck outside the diner and watched my son through the window. He was sitting alone in a booth near the front, stirring chocolate milk with a straw while he waited for me. I remember that image so clearly it still makes my chest hurt, but instead of walking inside, I drove away. I wish I had an explanation that sounded better than that, but I don't. I'd had a few drinks beforehand, and somewhere between the parking lot and the diner door, I convinced myself Ethan would only be more disappointed if he saw me like that. That's how people get trapped inside their own shame. At first, shame comes from what you've done. Then eventually, it becomes the reason you keep making new mistakes. I got sober when I was 52, not because of some dramatic rock bottom moment. I was just tired. Tired of waking up and trying to remember what I said the night before. Tired of apologizing for things I barely remembered doing. Tired of feeling my world getting smaller every year. After I got sober, I moved into a small place outside town and started working at Walter's Garage, an old friend of mine. Quiet place, quiet life. And honestly, back then I figured maybe that was all I deserved. Then one afternoon, Walter tossed a newspaper down on the workbench in front of me. Your boy made the paper. I looked down. It was Ethan wearing a baseball uniform, head coach for a high school varsity team. There was a team photo next to the article. He looked older than the last version of him I still carried in my mind. Broader shoulders, some gray already starting in his beard. Standing beside his players with a smile that looked so much like Claire's, it nearly knocked the air out of me. I stared at that picture for a long time. Long enough that Walter finally pretended to busy himself somewhere else so I wouldn't feel embarrassed. That night I drove to the ball field. I parked in the farthest corner where the lights didn't reach very well. And for the first time in years, I saw my son again, not up close, not where he could see me, just from inside my old truck. After that, it became a habit. Every home game, I showed up. Some nights, I listened to the crowd cheering through a cracked window while rain tapped against the windshield. Some nights, the gas station coffee in my hand went cold before the first inning ended. I watched parents walk past my truck carrying folding chairs and blankets while laughing with each other. A few times I almost walked in. I really did. But after spending enough years avoiding someone, eventually you stop knowing what the right thing even looks like anymore. So I stayed where I knew how to exist, outside. More than a decade passed that way. I learned about Ethan's life in pieces. Walter showed me wedding photos online when Ethan got married. Claire mentioned during a short phone call that I had a grandson now. Jacob. I remember standing frozen in the garage with a wrench in my hand after hearing that name. A grandson. A whole new person had entered this world, and I still wasn't part of any of it. That night, I sat in the truck outside Lincoln Field longer than usual. The scoreboard buzzed softly after the game ended. Somewhere nearby, people were loading folding chairs into SUVs. A forgotten baseball rolled slowly near the fence when the wind pushed it. And for the first time in years, I finally admitted something to myself. My absence had become normal for everyone else, except me. Then last October came. Cold night, windy, dry leaves scraping across the pavement every time a car passed through the lot. I was sitting in my usual spot when somebody knocked on the driver's side window. I jumped hard enough to spill coffee across my jeans. I looked up, and there was Ethan, older now, gray in his beard, tired eyes I recognized immediately because they looked too much like mine. For the first few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded toward the field. You planning on sitting out here forever? Not angry, not warm either, just honest. I slowly rolled the window down. I didn't think you knew. Ethan let out a small laugh through his nose. You've driven the same truck for 15 years. Hearing him call me dad right then almost took the breath out of me. Not because it sounded emotional, because it sounded normal, like a word that used to belong in our lives before it disappeared for too long. I looked down at the coffee stain on my jeans. I almost came inside 100 times, I said. Yeah, Ethan answered quietly. I figured. The stadium lights reflected across the windshield between us. Somewhere behind him, kids were laughing near the dugout. Then he glanced back toward the field. Jacob's playing shortstop tonight. I swallowed hard. My grandson was out there somewhere, and I'd never even met him. When I was a kid, Ethan said after a moment, I used to look toward the parking lot too. I closed my eyes for a second. I know. He nodded once like that was enough. Then we just stood there in the cold without knowing what to say next. And honestly, that was probably the most truthful part of all of it. No movie speech, no instant forgiveness. Just two men standing in the middle of too many lost years, neither of them quite sure how to begin again. Finally, Ethan pulled at the sleeve of his jacket and said, If you want, you can come watch the game. Not dramatic, not overly emotional. A little awkward, actually, which somehow made it mean more. I looked past him toward the field glowing beneath the stadium lights. I could hear the announcer's voice drifting through the cold air, smell wet grass and popcorn from the concession stand near the bleachers. For years, I'd convinced myself staying away was less selfish. But standing there that night, I realized something. At some point, disappearing stopped being about protecting other people. It became about protecting my own shame. My legs felt heavy stepping out of that truck. Like every year I'd missed was sitting on my shoulders all at once. Ethan started walking toward the gate, then slowed down slightly when he realized I wasn't beside him yet. Not exactly waiting, just slowing down enough so I could catch up. When we walked into the ballpark, nobody turned around to look at me. There wasn't some huge emotional moment. No music. Nobody knew who I was. Just the sound of cleats scraping dirt, coaches shouting from the dugout, kids laughing somewhere behind the bleachers. An ordinary baseball game. An ordinary life. The kind I'd spent almost 20 years standing outside of. Then Ethan pointed toward the field. There's Jacob. I looked out at a skinny little boy standing at shortstop, his cap tilted sideways exactly the way Ethan used to wear his when he was small. The kid brushed dirt off his glove and glanced up toward the stands for a second. I don't know if he was looking for anybody, but for the first time in a very long time, I didn't go back to the parking lot.